Hey, Marcus House with you here, and welcome to episode 8 in this highly modded Galileo's Planet Pack installation of Kerbal Space Program 1.3. In the last episode, we did some pretty cool tourist missions in a bizarre looking tourist passenger vessel. You can check that out in the card up in the top right here. What we're doing today, however, is heading back to Iota to pick up a bunch of science. We're just upgrading a few of our buildings. The astronaut complex there can be upgraded so that we can do some EVAs in future, and we've already just upgraded the Research and Development Center. Heading into mission control here, we are going to pick up the science data from the surface of Iota mission, and we'll also grab a couple of these satellite placement missions first there for Iota, and we can also do another one here, positioning a satellite here around Gale. So we'll pick that up. We've got 3 contracts to do at the same time. What I want to do here just quickly is see if I can unlock a few more science instruments, because as this is going to be a science mission, we'll just see how we go. Ideally I want to get to this tier here, this precision engineering tier, because I can unlock a few of these cool parts. Now to get to that tier I can either unlock this tier here, miniaturization, or I could go for electrics. I actually think probably the miniaturization one's better for me, because I can use this probe core here, the OKTO2 unit, so we'll unlock this tier here. I'll just quickly grab the mystery goo units and that sort of thing, so we'll grab that. So we have the surface laser light imager there, we have the mystery goo unit there, going to be quite useful, and I'll just unlock the OKTO2 probe core. I'm not going to take this intelligence satellite because A, it's really expensive, and it's quite large. So I might pick that up for a future mission, and on top of this we'll just unlock the space exploration tier, which is going to give us another RPWS antenna and also the experiment return vessel. So this now leaves us with only 125 science points remaining. There's not really much else I can get. Ideally I'd like to get this tier here, the scanning tech tier, but that's going to cost us 300 in research, and it gives us things like our infrared telescope and some more science instruments, which are going to be quite useful. So I'm going to launch this mission today straight away. I'm not going to show the build of this one simply because the actual rocket is a slight modification on one that I did the other week. If you want to check out the full playlist for this Galileo's Planet Pack series, I do urge you to do so. The link is up here in the top right now. Now this rocket is made with entirely stock parts, with the exception of just some of the science instruments, so you can basically use this exact same design in your stock game if you are playing stock. You can also use it of course in a Galileo's Planet Pack installation of Kerbal Space Program if you would like to do so. So we are just heading up out of the atmosphere now. We are passing 600 meters per second, getting our apoapsis right up here above 70 kilometers. As soon as we get out of the thicker part of the atmosphere, of course, we are just turning completely horizontal and getting as much horizontal velocity as we can as fast as possible. As soon as we get past 50 kilometers, it's quite safe to now deploy those fairings and leave our payload here to head off by its lonesome, leaving our booster to fall back harmlessly into the atmosphere, and that's actually going to be picked up by the stage recovery mod because it did have some parachutes and some fuel left in it for the landing. That stage recovery mod is quite useful. It calculates all that sort of stuff and just works out whether the booster would have been recoverable. So we've popped the solar panels. We'll just pick up any science instruments we can from here that are reusable science experiments. This is the radio plasma wave scan science instrument, which picks up some pretty cool science and sends that back to Gale. We're going to be able to use that a few times on the way to Iota. And speaking of which, we are just doing our circularization burn here, keeping our apoapsis time to 0, just slightly moving up and down the nav ball just to make sure that we're circularizing right at the apoapsis. And there we go, we now have our satellite in an orbit of Gale. And you can obviously pick up any of your science readings from here, transmit them back before you proceed on your very epic mission. We have quite a large radio dish on this thing, so we can communicate easily from the moons as long as we have direct signal to Gale in some way. Now what we want to do is first complete our first contract, which is going to be to get up here and pop our satellite in this exact placement as shown by the green orbit line there. So what we want to do is basically raise our apoapsis so it intersects with our ascending node. That's going to mean that we can do our inclination change at the ascending node without using too much delta V. And for those of you that are a little new to the game, you are always best to do an inclination change at the lowest velocity possible. Currently, of course, we are right down here just above Gale's atmosphere, so we are travelling quite fast at the moment at 2,700 meters per second. Now, if we were to do our inclination change right here, which we could do, it would cost us a lot more delta V than when we get up to our apoapsis, where we're going to be moving much slower. Now, the reason that I have a 9-degree inclination here is because our launch site, or our default launch site on Gale, is actually not on the equator, so whenever we launch 90 degrees we end up with a slight inclination, usually around 9 degrees or so. So as Gale falls away from us, we can now adjust that inclination right up here, and you'll see here we're only moving now at 474 meters per second in the orbit around Gale at the apoapsis. So doing our inclination change here is much quicker. That only took us around 5 seconds of burn time with this tiny little Terrier engine. So just fine-tuning that now, and we can essentially just do our prograde burn because our apoapsis was at the same place. Now, these satellite placement contracts are usually fairly lenient. You only have to get your orbit fairly close and it will instantly just drop away, and you'll see that happen here. There you go. So we have already achieved that contract. We just need to wait for 10 seconds and there we go. We have completed that contract. Now, if you were wondering why that was less than 10 seconds, it's because the video is slightly sped up just to keep things moving along just a little quicker. So we are just planning our intercept here with Iota. We have a slight inclination difference here as well, so we're just going to fine tune this just a little. We're still out by about 1 degree. And the reason that I want to get this inclination right down to almost 0 is because our next satellite placement is around Iota, exactly around the equatorial plane. So I'll just set up a maneuver node here and basically raise that apoapsis just so that we can get a rough idea where we need to come in. It's nice to actually have the maneuver nodes because they've been locked since the start of the game, and I only unlocked them I think in the last episode from memory. So I've got the trajectory set up to just past that satellite placement position, and we'll just time warp until we can begin that burn. Now we have around 300 meters per second here just to raise our orbit right up to Iota. That's not a huge burn, but we are getting fairly light on fuel. The idea is to actually touch down with the fuel that we have remaining here. It's going to be a little tight. Just finally adjusting until we just intersect there with that orbit, and we'll time warp now, leaving Gale completely behind us as we head into the sphere of influence of Iota. Now, a common question I get is how you get those clouds around Gale or Kerbin, and that is the Environmental Visual Enhancements mod. It is a great mod, and mix that with Scatterer, and yes, you have just a wonderful looking game all of a sudden. It's really brilliant. I wish they'd almost have those as options in the stock game that you could just turn on if you would like to. Now you'll notice in this playthrough that I'm not talking a lot about the different science instruments that I'm picking up. I'm sort of assuming at this point that you know that you need to pick up science instrument readings from different biomes and different conditions and that sort of thing. The X Science Here and Now mod is brilliant because it will just prompt you whenever there's science available, so you can just choose straight from that panel. So we have just grabbed that second contract there. We have positioned our satellite in the equatorial orbit of Iota. We only have one left now, and that is to pick up some science from the surface of Iota. Now, one thing we do need to keep in mind here is we want to have a signal with Gale, especially when we're coming into land. Because, yes, if we lose signal with this thing when we're going to touch down, we are going to lose our access to the probe. We don't have any Kerbals on board. So we've just time warped around so we have a little sunlight, and I'm just using the trajectories mod here to basically place myself in an area where I haven't been before. This little mountainy flat area there is going to be quite good because I think that's going to be a new biome. Well, hopefully. On the way down, of course, we can grab any science that we are prompted with and send back all of those reusable science instruments, just transmit those back to Kerbin. And yes, we'll just retract some of these huge, big experiments and pop those landing legs down, and then time warp down until we're about to touch down. The thruster weight on this vessel is pretty good, and Iota doesn't have a real huge gravity, so we can rest assured that we are going to be able to touch down fairly easily without worrying too much about doing a perfect suicide burn. The losses due to gravity on Iota are very minimal, so we can sort of take our time, and we have just a sliver of fuel left just for the touchdown. So in the end, this was actually planned fairly perfectly. I didn't intend to cut it quite so tight with the Delta V allowance there. But we now have a vessel on Iota, and you'll see at the top of this vessel we have a little return vehicle which we can use just to send some of the science instruments back from some of these more problematic science experiments, such as the material study and the mystery goo. So we already picked up a mystery goo reading from orbit, or as we were coming into Iota. We'll grab another one from the surface here, and we'll just load these up here shortly into our experiment storage unit. Very handy little part, that one, and a lot of people don't even realise that it's still there if they've been playing the game for a long time, because it's fairly new to the game. I think that came in version 1.2. So there we are, placed on quite a mountainous area of Iota, and it's just time to right click that experiment storage unit, collect all science. We now have all the remaining science loaded up in this thing to return, and we can now take off with this little tiny vessel. It is only using 2 of the little spider engines there, and we'll just immediately turn to the 90-degree mark on the nav ball and full thrust. We just want to make sure that our prograde marker there doesn't dip below that horizon line. That means that we're going to start falling, and we just need to basically keep going here until our little return vessel here gets up to orbital velocity. Now, orbital velocity isn't that high. It is just shy of 300 meters per second, and you can see here just raising that apoapsis, and I'm only doing 289 meters per second, so very, very easy to get up and down from Iota. And we'll just time warp around until we get our signal back. And there we go, we just came into range of Gale there, so we'll just quickly set up our maneuver to head back to Gale. Only a fairly small burn, only around 200 meters per second here. Again, we have got plenty of Delta V in this little return vessel. Way too much really. I could have easily done this just with one of those Oscar B fuel tanks. So just completing this little burn here now. Although it is a small burn, it does take some time with these spider engines. They're not particularly good with their thrust to weight. Just dropping that periapsis right down to around 45 kilometers or so from Gale's surface. That's going to give us a little bit of aero braking. Ideally, I'd like to come down in the light if possible. Now, as Iota falls away from us here, I just thought I'd explain a little bit as to why I didn't want to return the entire vessel to Gale, and that is because I want a vessel on Iota's surface. That's just so that if we see a mission pop up in mission control that requires some science readings from the surface of Iota, then I can just quickly switch to that vessel, take the science readings, and send them straight back for basically instant profit for no effort. I can also do the same thing, of course, with the satellites that I already have placed here around Gale, as well as the satellite that's already placed up in a polar orbit around Iota. So just coming down here through the atmosphere, we are going to initially lose these 2 solar panels. They are sacrificial, and there they go there. We can't retract those back in there. They're non-retractable ones. I actually haven't managed to, haven't bothered, I should say, to unlock the retractable ones yet. So at this point, I'm just going to waste a whole heap of Delta V doing a retrograde burn just so that I can come down for you guys in the light. I don't like landing in the dark because it's a little bit boring, and at the same time it would be cool to see if I can just land in an area that I haven't been before. Perhaps these little rivers over here just in the middle of this massive continent. And there we go, using that trajectories mod I should be able to get that quite close. So just doing 2,000 meters per second here now, and I don't even think I'm going to need the heat shield. We should be able to re-enter here no problems without losing these little fuel tanks. There we go, down under 1,000 meters per second. We'll just burn the rest of that fuel as we pop out those parachutes. And that's an awesome looking river. I didn't quite get in it. It would have been cool to get in it to see if that's actually a different biome of its own. I'll have to come back and revisit that one. So the parachutes are now out, and down we come here next to this river system. That is awesome. So this has been a very successful mission. We've returned a bunch of science here from the surface of Iota and from space around Iota. We also transmitted a lot back. I suspect we've probably earned around 350 science points just from this one trip. And we now, of course, have a little vessel on Iota that we can use for sending back science whenever we need to. So we'll just quickly recover this vessel and check what we got. Now, we have returned 157 science points just in that probe, but we obviously transferred a crap load more science before that. Also recovered some funds there, not too many. And yes, we've got now 499.5 science points to begin our next mission. Now, if you would like a copy of that particular vessel, it is down in the description with all of the other vessels. We can see here we have completed all of those contracts that we had picked up. We've positioned the satellite there. But what we can do as we finalize this particular episode is just do another tourist run with all of these tourists. I just picked up a crap load of them. And yes, if you didn't see the last mission, this is what we were doing. We were sending up loads of tourists, and these missions are extremely lucrative. What we can actually do with these missions is just send all of these Kerbals up to orbit. They basically provide us with around 30,000 in funds each, just for coming up to orbit, reversing and landing. So if you want to check out where I built that vessel and all that sort of thing, you can check out that episode from the info panel in the top right that I popped up earlier. Now, what you will probably notice actually is that we don't even have a pilot in the command pod this time. These are all tourists, all 13. Are tourists here, so we don't even have Burberry on board. What I did was just added a little probe core onto this thing, and now I have the ability just to take an extra passenger. Just being extremely wasteful here at the same time with an inclination change that I didn't really need to do, and that's because this thing is just so resilient to heat. I haven't actually killed any Kerbals yet in this thing, which is pretty bizarre considering that these Kerbals are basically just using their helmets to aerobrake this vessel. So I've found as long as you re-enter the atmosphere at around 2,000 meters per second or just under, they will actually survive quite fine, which is a little bizarre, I will say. I did expect them to burn up, but even though they're basically sitting here on fire, they're perfectly fine. They barely even get a heat tolerance warning. So they're just heading down here now. We'll just touch down quickly there in the ocean and recover the vessel there. We'll grab some surface samples on the way in as well, which they're able to do, interestingly. And there we go there. We've just earned a crap load of money. So I did a few more of these missions just because as soon as we get a Kerbal up to one of the moons, then all of a sudden our tourist contracts are going to become much more time consuming because they're going to ask us to start taking tourists around the moons and to orbit and land on the moons and that sort of thing. So although that will return us more money, we certainly won't be able to do them as fast or as easily as what we can with these really simple orbital missions. In fact, what you may have noticed with this particular vessel is that I had a fairing underneath this, and the reason why is because a lot of you very smartly suggested in the comments that because I was getting those issues with the vessel flipping on the ascent, that I should just cover them all with a fairing. Now, as we just head over the poles of Gale here with that beautiful view, and we can see that aurora down there, that looks really awesome. I can just explain to you that I did, in this particular example, try it with a fairing, and as soon as the vessel hit the launch pad after load, basically all of the Kerbals started getting flung out of the vessel through the fairings, exploding on the ground all over the place. So yes, it was a great idea, but no matter how big I made that fairing, the Kerbals just exploded out of there. They just don't like being stuck in there for some reason. I'm not sure why. If anyone else can figure out why that was happening, that would be most awesome, because it would be good to cover these guys with a fairing on the ascent just to make that ascent profile just a little easier. Now, I would like to know what mission you would like to see me do next. Currently, the winning suggestion is heading off to SETI to touch down with a Kerbal for the first time, probably taking a few snacks along with me just so that I don't perish on the way. But I would like to know what you think, because believe it or not, this entire series has been entirely driven almost by your suggestions. As soon as I see a mission pop up there in mission control that has been suggested, I'm pretty much just picking that straight away. So yeah. So you can see there we now have over $1 million in funds just from those few contracts that we've completed, and I would love to thank you for watching this episode. Let me know what you think of it. All of your support is just awesome. If you have any questions for me, of course, please do whack them down in the comments below. If this video has earned your subscription, welcome to the channel, and thank you all my existing subscribers for being awesome. Today in the tile in the bottom left we have the playlist for this series. Please do give it a watch if you are new to the channel. In the top right is my latest video, and in the bottom right a video that YouTube has selected from my channel just for you by some sad little robot. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.